Let's dig a little deeper into those policy solutions and why they are so effective in convincing people to vote with their feet. Let's bring in our next guest. He is Lee Schalk. He's the Vice President of Policy here at the American Legislative Exchange Council. He's here as well. Lee, good afternoon. Welcome back to the program. Thanks for joining us on what is a very busy Wednesday at the ALEC 51st annual meeting.
Good afternoon, Tim and Chris, and thanks for having me on again. Yeah, we're so excited to be with you and have you here with us in Denver, along with 1,500 of our best friends. I mean, we've got state legislators here in Denver from nearly every state in the country. And of course, what's so unique about ALEC is that we bring in partners from the private sector, business leaders, nonprofit leaders as well to collaborate. But I've got to say, there is so much excitement. It's palpable at this meeting, but we're at such a pivotal moment in our nation's history, and it really cannot be overstated the importance of the policy discussions that are taking place this week with ramifications for every family in our country. And so, we've already talked a bit about education freedom. We'll get into energy independence, economic opportunity, securing the southern border. And I could go on, but it's already been a great week in Denver with a lot more to come.
Lee, I got to tell you, I had no idea that ALEC has had 51 of these annual conferences. ALEC didn't get on my radar screen until probably 10 or so years ago when you guys were the villain of the left, kind of like the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 is the latest boogeyman. I just want to go back a little bit. Why was ALEC such a boogeyman for the left a few years ago? They hated you guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Chris. I mean, we knew what the term cancel culture was before anyone else did. And it's unfortunate because when you stick to your core principles at ALEC, we've got our three core principles: limited government, free markets, federalism. You've got people from the left and these progressives that come out of the woodwork. And I've got to say, we still hear some of this today. But that ALEC is extreme, that our policies are extreme. But you've got to ask yourself, what's extreme, for example, about giving parents more choice over their children's education? What's extreme about having safer neighborhoods or securing our border? Or what's extreme about being able to keep more of your hard-earned paycheck? I mean, we're not the extremists at ALEC. Those progressive policies are extreme.
Yeah, and Lee, we heard echoes of that with some of the speakers we already heard today. Lee, I mean, it's only been day one of this conference, and it's already been, as you said, extremely exciting. We heard from ALEC CEO Lisa Nelson. She talked about many of those issues you just did. What's extreme about allowing people to keep more of their hard-earned dollars and promoting tax cuts and many more. We heard from former Governor Doug Ducey of the great state of Arizona. Had an excellent discussion at the opening luncheon. We heard from famous pollster Scott Rasmussen. I mean, for all of us policy and political wonks, this is just a great place to be. Lee, why is ALEC attracting such a large following? I guess people are thirsting for actual solutions versus the daily political fear mongering that goes on in Washington, D.C., right? The states seem to be where it's all at these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think any good solution from a policy perspective that exists in America today, it probably got its start at the state level and probably in a lot of the states that you guys were talking about as we began this interview. But it's been so great to hear from the stage from leaders like former Governor Ducey, who actually is one of the co-chairs of ALEC's Education Freedom Alliance. Our other co-chair, Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa, will close out our meeting on Friday. And I've got to say, for your listeners, you can actually live stream these events at alec.org and watch it live. But the other thing, and you touched on this, what's extreme about being able to keep more of your hard-earned paycheck? We're making a big push this week to get more legislators to add their voice and say, Congress, you've got to permanently extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, because if you do nothing, all of our taxes, all of our federal income taxes are going up. President Biden, Kamala Harris, they've said, we won't raise taxes on low or middle income earners, but that's a complete lie. They're also saying that they want to let these tax cuts expire. And so this is so important. And one of the things that we do at ALEC, we amplify the voice of the states in Washington, D.C. And so far, we've got over 350 legislators that have added their name to our letter from over 40 states. And we're going to continue that push and that conversation here in Denver.
Lee, Tim and I, of course, are thrilled to be broadcasting our show from the convention here, but we're also kind of working too. Tim is part of ALEC. He's part of staff. My wife is here representing Americans for Citizen Voting, and she is presenting model legislation that's going to be voted on, I think, tomorrow or Friday. Talk about how ALEC crafts model legislation and how that gets to the different legislatures and states.
We had more than 80 pieces of draft model policy submitted for this meeting, which is an all-time record for us at ALEC. And I think it really shows how engaged our members are, whether they're legislators or folks in the private sector who are helping with these policy ideas. But we're going to go through a process this week where our task forces are debating and discussing and voting on these model policies, whether or not ALEC should adopt them as official models. And one of the great things about ALEC is this process and our model policy library is completely transparent. It's available at alec.org. If you want to know what we're about, just log on and hit the search bar. But we expect a number of those model policies to make it through our process this week and couldn't be more excited. I mean, to your point on the topic of citizens voting, that's a great issue, but we've also got everything from housing affordability, grid reliability, artificial intelligence, tax reform, licensing. I mean, I could go on all day. It's really a packed week.
Speaking to Lee Schalk, he is the Vice President of Policy at the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC can be found at alec.org. And Lee, the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? It's great that we have these annual meetings and these gatherings. It's great that we have all these speakers and VIPs and wonderful spokespeople for their causes. But ALEC also distills all of these conversations and all of the data around them into a ton of publications. Folks can find those at alec.org as well. Lee, one of the most famous ones that I know you're heavily involved with, along with Jonathan Williams, who we've frequently spoken with as well, is the Rich States, Poor States publication, 17 years in the making. Lee, the policies that ALEC promotes shows that prosperity flows to those states that adopt ALEC model policies that are promoted by ALEC-minded legislators, legislators who gravitate to ALEC because ALEC speaks to them from their internal philosophies of limited government, free markets, federalism. Lee, talk about the states that are the highlights and the lowlights in publications like Rich States, Poor States. I don't think our listeners are going to be surprised.
They won't be surprised, Tim. And you're right. Rich States, Poor States has really become our flagship publication. You can see our 50-state rankings for economic outlook on richstatespoorstates.org. But Utah has been a perennial powerhouse, ranking number 1 in our report every year, just with their common sense approach to policy, lower taxes, fewer regulations. Also, a state like North Carolina has surged in the rankings over the past decade, moving up to as high as number 2, I believe currently number 4 in our rankings, because they implemented incredible tax reform back in 2013. And since then, they've just attracted hundreds of thousands of new residents. Of course, Florida performs very well, states like Tennessee, the 9 no income tax states, and contrast that with places like New York or New Jersey, California. I mean, I talk a lot about the contrast between New York and Florida. They both have about the same size of population. New York spends twice the amount of money in their budget while also levying some of the highest income taxes in the nation. Florida gets it all done with no personal income tax. They actually shrank their budget this year under Governor DeSantis' leadership. So Rich States, Poor States, so many great stories that can be gleaned, and something that we're also talking a lot about here in Denver.
Lee, before President Biden stepped out of the presidential race last week, conservatives, Republicans were feeling really good about this upcoming election. But since Kamala Harris is the presumptive nominee, does ALEC having more of a sense of urgency? And are you detecting that among the legislators that are at the conference here today? this week?
Well, all of our members are carefully, I would say, evaluating the policy proposals of these candidates. And the big one, well, there are a couple of really big ones. Two that I'll mention that I think are really relevant here: securing our southern border. ALEC's board took a trip to the southern border, Eagle Pass, Texas, and saw firsthand just the failure of the federal government. Fast forward, a few months, the situation has only gotten worse. And every state now in the country is truly a border state. The other thing I'll go back to is on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This is a core plank of whether it was President Biden's past candidacy or Kamala Harris, but also for President Trump. He's out there talking about the need to renew the Trump tax cuts. And so these are the types of policy issues that our members are discussing. They're talking about what can we do from the perspective of a state legislator. And that's so important because the solutions, again, to our country's ills are going to come from state leaders.
Mm-hmm. Lee, I have noticed at the ALEC meetings that I've been with, especially in the most recent years, and I've been participating in ALEC meetings for 17 years, that the tent, just like with one particular political party, the tent for ALEC has definitely grown. We see people here from all different walks of life, all different kind of races, colors, creeds, codes. And I think most importantly, Lee, a lot of young people are attending ALEC meetings in more and more droves. New alliance created with Run Gen Z. I'd love you to talk about what Run Gen Z is. And secondly, Lee, what are some of the cutting edge topics that are rising to the fore at this ALEC annual meeting? Artificial intelligence, I know, jumps to mind, cryptocurrency, and there's probably some others that you could tell our listeners about.
Run Gen Z is just this incredible new organization that has partnered with ALEC's sister organization, ALEC Action. And so what they're all about is identifying these new up-and-coming young leaders, folks who may be running for statewide office or to become a state legislator, perhaps even at the local level, and really helping to train them and really help them gain a better understanding of what good policy can look like. And they've had just an incredible track record. And so you're right. It's really cool to see just that presence from, I think we have a session called From Zoomer to Boomer, right? We've got the young and the old here at ALEC this week. And it's so great to see. The other thing, Tim, a thought that you spurred in my mind is the notion and the importance of ALEC being a nonpartisan organization. Right. And I think that could be a common misconception. But if you tune in on Friday morning, you'll watch a fireside chat live at our meeting between Dr. Arthur Laffer and Governor Jared Polis of Colorado. And they're going to have a really fascinating conversation about Colorado's economy. And of course, Governor Polis has signed a couple of income tax cuts into law here in Colorado. But it's so important to just reiterate that ALEC, as a nonpartisan organization, we welcome everybody to be part of these conversations. Yet we will always stick to our North Star, those three core principles: limited government, free markets, and federalism. And that applies to all of these policy areas, whether it's AI, taking a look at central bank digital currencies, maybe prohibiting those, hopefully prohibiting those in the states, and other cutting edge issues. We're always going to apply and look at them through that lens.
Go ahead. I just want to throw in there that I was amazed and encouraged to see all of the young people at the conference today. You'd expect the legislators to be more older people, but it was really encouraging seeing all the young folks.
There really is two legislative staff at the meeting as well.
That's right.
I think, how can we as an organization, we think about this a lot, how can we help make legislators more effective? Some of them may not have a staff member at all, or they might have one or two. It's not like being a member of Congress where you've got a whole team working for you 24/7. And so that's another component of this meeting and really part of the value that we hope to provide to our members.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And indeed, from the Kids Congress to the Run Gen Z program to legislators of all ages, shapes and stripes. It's a wonderful melting pot of America here at the ALEC conference. Lee Schalk, Vice President of Policy, Thanks so much, Lee, for joining us, folks. Everything can be found if you want to check out ALEC. It's really interesting. We've had some just citizens that I've known over the years that got engaged, and now they're ALEC members. ALEC.org. It's for everyone. Lee, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Tim and Chris.